In a surprising shift, Ontario Premier Doug Ford, once a staunch ally of President Donald Trump, has gone public with his dissatisfaction with the U.S. leader. Ford's political relationship with Trump, long marked by a period of quiet support even amid contentious trade disputes, has taken a significant turn. From 2018 to 2022, Ford largely avoided directly confronting Trump, even as tensions between the U.S. and Canada reached boiling points. However, with Trump's August 1st tariff deadline looming, Ford has made it clear that his patience has worn thin. He has openly stated that he no longer trusts Trump, and that the proposed trade agreement is nothing more than a so-called deal. Ford's declaration of distrust is emblematic of a deeper change in Canada's approach to the trade war with the U.S. Once perceived as a temporary spat, this trade conflict is now viewed by Canadian officials as a long-term reality. Ford, alongside other provincial premiers, has expressed a new willingness to forge ahead with an independent strategy, signaling that Canada is no longer waiting for Trump to make the first move. This evolving dynamic represents a major shift in Canadian politics. The country is no longer depending on the goodwill of the U.S. Instead, it is preparing to rewrite the rules of trade in North America, driven by a strategic reassessment of the situation. The message Ford has been delivering to the U.S. has been clear and simple. Canada is America's largest trading partner, and the U.S. needs to pay attention to its #1 customer. According to trade data from 2024, Canadian imports from the U.S. reached a staggering $359 billion, far surpassing the U.S. export figures to Japan, China, South Korea, the UK, and France combined. Ford's framing of the issue is compelling. Canada buys more American goods than any other nation, a fact that should resonate with American voters and businesses. Yet, under Trump's leadership, this argument may be falling on deaf ears. Trump's focus has been less on past trade relationships and more on securing new trade surpluses and commitments from countries willing to make specific future pledges to purchase U.S. goods. Despite the strength of Canada's trade position, this moral leverage may not be enough to sway Trump, who has consistently favored economic deals that promise new future purchases rather than revisiting past trading dynamics. Meanwhile, Canada is grappling with the consequences of Trump's policies, particularly his approach to tariffs. The U.S. has raised anti-dumping duties on Canadian softwood lumber, marking the latest chapter in a series of punitive measures aimed at specific Canadian industries. Just this month, U.S. officials increased tariffs on softwood lumber by over 14%, from an average of 7.66% to 20.56%. The lumber industry, which directly supports over 28,000 workers in New Brunswick alone, is now feeling the strain of these targeted tariff hikes. For the U.S., these sector-by-sector attacks are a strategic attempt to fracture Canada's unity, putting economic pressure on individual provinces. But Canada's response has been unified, with provincial premiers coming together in support of a collective stance against Trump's tactics. Canada is also pushing back in ways that go beyond mere resistance to tariffs. While Trump has focused on cutting deals with other countries such as Japan, the European Union, and the United Kingdom, Canada is taking a different approach. It is not asking for special treatment or concessions, but is instead reasserting its value as a trade partner. Canada remains the U.S. most integrated trading partner, not just as a buyer but as a critical supplier of energy, electricity, minerals, and technology. Canadian provinces are integral to U.S. supply chains, particularly in sectors like auto parts and semiconductors. This kind of structural leverage is not easily quantifiable or negotiable in terms of simple tariffs or investment pledges. It is a strategic advantage that Canada is choosing to preserve rather than trade away for short-term relief. At the heart of Canada's position is a recognition that the current moment is not just about responding to Trump's pressure tactics, but preparing for a much larger and more consequential negotiation in 2026. The existing North American trade agreement, known as USMCA or CUSMA in Canada, is set for a scheduled review in February of that year. Canada's decision to resist a rushed deal is part of a longer-term strategy aimed at entering that review process from a position of strength. By avoiding the pressure to settle now, Canada preserves its flexibility for negotiations that could redefine the entire structure of North American trade. In the short term, this may involve absorbing the pain of higher tariffs and economic disruption. But in the long term, Canada is playing for a more advantageous position. Prime Minister Mark Carney and Premier Ford are not simply reacting to pressure, They are setting the stage for a negotiation that could fundamentally reshape the terms of trade between the US, Canada, and Mexico. For Canada, waiting for the right moment may be the key to a more favorable outcome in the years ahead. The battle between Canada and the US over trade tariffs has now moved from a localized skirmish to a broader political and economic standoff. As President Trump moves forward with his planned tariffs, the question arises, will Canada blink, or will it continue to stand firm? The August 1st deadline is fast approaching, and tensions are escalating. Trump's public remarks have only added fuel to the fire, signaling that the US may no longer be interested in a negotiated deal with Canada. Instead, Trump suggested that tariffs alone might suffice. His rhetoric could not have been clearer. The US is done waiting. For Canada, this statement served as a stark reminder of the fragility of the US-Canada trade relationship under Trump's leadership. For years, Canada had been one of America's closest allies. But now, the relationship has been upended by the harsh realities of Trump's trade policies. The uncertainty of the situation has forced Canada's hand, leading Prime Minister Mark Carney and his team to reassess their position. Carney's response has been unequivocal. Canada will not sign a bad deal, regardless of the pressure. This message is not just for Trump but for Canadians as well, as Carney and other provincial leaders signal a united front against unfair trade practices. Trump's approach to Canada is a stark contrast to his dealings with other nations. In negotiations with countries like Japan, the European Union, and the UK, Trump has focused on securing new commitments and future trade pledges. But with Canada, this strategy seems to be backfiring. The United States is playing a tactical game, applying pressure through sector-by-sector tariffs to weaken Canadian unity. First it was steel and aluminum, then autos, and now it's softwood lumber. This piecemeal approach is designed to target specific industries and divide Canadian opinion, but instead of fracturing the country, it has led to greater unity among Canada's provincial premiers. The latest development in this saga is the sharp increase in duties on Canadian softwood lumber. The U.S. Commerce Department recently raised anti-dumping tariffs from an average of 7.66% to 20.56%, a jump of over 14%. This move has deeply troubled Canadian producers, particularly those in New Brunswick and British Columbia, where the lumber industry provides thousands of jobs. The economic pressure is intense, but Canada is standing firm. The impact of these tariffs may cause temporary pain, but Canada is looking to the long-term picture. By resisting Trump's short-term tactics, Canada is buying itself time to position itself strategically for future negotiations. Despite the immediate challenges posed by these tariffs, Canada has made it clear that it is not seeking special treatment. Instead, Canada is reasserting its value in the trade relationship, emphasizing its role as a key supplier of critical resources like energy, electricity, and minerals. Unlike other nations, Canada's relationship with the U.S. is not just based on buying and selling goods, it is rooted in deep economic integration. From auto parts to semiconductors, many U.S. industries rely on Canadian supply chains. This is not leverage that can be captured through simple tariffs or quick trade deals. It is a structural advantage that Canada is choosing to preserve rather than relinquish for the sake of a rushed agreement. The timing of these tensions is crucial. While Trump is focused on using tariffs as leverage, Canada is focused on the bigger picture. In 2026, the USMCA, the trilateral trade agreement between the US, Canada, and Mexico, is set to undergo its mandatory review. This review will be the real battleground, and Canada is preparing for it. By holding off on a rushed deal now, Canada is ensuring that it will enter the review process with more negotiating power. The US may be trying to force Canada's hand now, but Carney and Ford are playing the long game, setting themselves up for a stronger position in the 2026 review. Canada's resistance to Trump's demands isn't just about protecting its economic interests, it is about asserting its independence on the global stage. Carney's message to Canadians is clear: the country will not be bullied into a bad deal. By standing firm now, Canada is positioning itself to secure a more favorable outcome in the future, even if that means enduring temporary economic pain. The economic pressure being applied by the US may be intense, but Canada's resolve remains steadfast. While the US is preparing to raise tariffs, Canada is preparing to absorb the blow. For Canada, this isn't just about surviving the immediate challenge, it's about positioning itself for a more stable and secure economic future. The ongoing trade dispute is not just a test of economic strength, but a test of political will. As Canada's leaders continue to stand their ground, it becomes increasingly clear that the country is determined to rewrite the rules of trade in North America, even if that means taking on Trump in the process. Trump's announcement that the US might be done negotiating with Canada, combined with his threat of a 35% tariff, has exposed a deeper fracture in US trade policy. His decision to threaten tariffs rather than pursue a more traditional negotiation route reveals a level of impatience with Canada that could ultimately backfire. Unlike his dealings with countries like Japan and the European Union, where pressure tactics have been more gradual and measured, Trump's sudden shift in tone toward Canada has shown a lack of understanding of the complex, intertwined nature of the US-Canada trade relationship. Canada, for its part, has turned this moment into a political victory. Prime Minister Mark Carney and his team have used Trump's remarks to their advantage, framing the US administration's behavior as erratic and unpredictable. In doing so, they have positioned themselves as the calm and rational counterpart in the trade dispute. The Canadian government has carefully managed public expectations, emphasizing that Canada will not be rushed into a deal that could harm its long-term economic stability. Trump's public remarks have allowed Canada to maintain the moral high ground in the negotiations, and as the US pushes for a quick deal, Canada stands firm, willing to absorb the economic impact of tariffs rather than agree to an unsatisfactory arrangement. Perhaps the most significant consequence of Trump's remarks won't be felt immediately. Instead, it will come in 2026, when the USMCA undergoes its mandatory review. The USMCA, the trade agreement that replaced NAFTA, includes a built-in provision for a review of the deal every 6 years. The first such review will take place in February 2026, and this will present Canada with its real opportunity to negotiate. In the run-up to that review, Canada will be able to leverage its position as a critical supplier of energy, minerals, and technology to the US. In fact, sources close to Ottawa suggest that the Canadian government is already preparing for the review, with a strategy that ties economic security, defense cooperation, and regional stability into the trade talks. This broader framework, which could include discussions about Arctic sovereignty, clean energy, and defense commitments, could shift the balance of power in future negotiations. If Canada can secure a more comprehensive deal that encompasses both trade and security interests, it will be in a much stronger position to negotiate with the US on its own terms. The threat of tariffs now, while painful, could ultimately serve as a stepping stone for Canada to secure a far more favorable deal in the long term. For Trump, this could prove to be a miscalculation. By threatening tariffs and dismissing the importance of a formal negotiation, he risks damaging the US-Canada relationship in ways that could have long-lasting repercussions. Not only could this hurt American businesses that rely on Canadian supply chains, but it could also weaken Trump's leverage going into the 2026 USMCA review. If Canada can demonstrate that it has been able to weather the current trade storm and position itself for a stronger outcome in the future, it may render Trump's tariff strategy ineffective. As Canadian companies continue to diversify their trade relationships, moving away from their reliance on US buyers, the consequences for the US could become more pronounced. Nearly 30% of Canadian exporters are already redirecting their trade to other countries, and this trend is only expected to grow. Canadian businesses are diversifying their markets and reducing their dependence on the US, creating new, more resilient supply chains that no longer hinge on American consumers. For the US, this shift could lead to a loss not only of customers but also of valuable partnerships. The big question now is whether Trump's impatience will prove to be his undoing. The US president's desire for a quick resolution to the trade dispute could lead him to overplay his hand, and Canada may be poised to turn the tables. The US may be preparing for a round of tariffs, but Canada is preparing for the long game. Carney and Ford's strategic patience could ultimately give Canada the upper hand in the future review of USMCA, positioning the country for a better deal in 2026. The trade battle between Canada and the US is far from over. While the immediate future may involve the pain of tariffs, Canada is already laying the groundwork for a more comprehensive long-term strategy. Trump's approach may have forced the situation into a temporary standoff, but in the end, it is Canada's careful and calculated response that will determine the future of North American trade. As the deadline looms and tensions rise, one thing is clear: the rules of the trade game are being rewritten, and Canada is determined to play for the long-term win.